lengthen the elbow, biceps at the elbow, and measure the shoulder. We've not covered how to measure the elbow yet. We'll be doing that on Tuesday, but it is not rocket science. You bisect the segments, make sure the axis is at the crease, and you're good to go. So for the first one, if we're going to maximally lengthen at the shoulder, I'm going to have you kind of lay sideways. There you go. Perfect. Okay. So again, this is a passive test. So with her elbow bent, because I don't want to be lengthening the biceps here, I'm maximally extending her shoulder. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is once I'm in this position, I'm going to straighten her elbow and see how much, keeping that shoulder extension, I'm seeing how far I can extend her elbow. I can get her elbow all the way extended, so that would be 0, and that would be normal. Okay? Now, the other way I can do the test is to maximally lengthen the biceps at the elbow. So I'm going to pronate and extend, and now I'm going to drop the arm down. Now we're going to measure this just like we would for shoulder extension the Chidi way. Okay, and relax. Okay, and I'm going this way, so I've got 68 degrees. So I would not document 0 to 68 because this is a length test. I would just document 68 degrees of shoulder extension. Okay, so if I was going to document that last one, I would have muscle length test, right biceps, and then in parentheses I would say shoulder extension, and I'd say 68 degrees. Okay, the first way, I didn't actually put a goni on her elbow because I could feel that she was all the way straight. I can do that. We can pretend that you weren't. So I'm maximally extending her shoulder. You've got just a boatload of extension in your shoulder. Which one of you is pick-me-upping over there? All right, so then for measuring her extension, so if we said that was all she had, the elbow is a little bit goofy because she's lacking extension, right? You can see that. So she would be negative 22 degrees because this would be 0 extension, and she was lacking 22 degrees. So when I documented that, I would say biceps, and then in parentheses, I would say elbow extension, and it would be negative, what did I just say, 21 degrees. Okay? So for extension, she doesn't get to 0. She's lacking that motion, so it would be a negative number, which is our first time we've had a negative number. Okay, we'll see the same for the knee. All right? So does everyone understand the 2 different ways you can measure biceps? All right.
So those are 2 different measurements, or are they technically measuring the same thing?
They're both measuring the length of the biceps. Okay. So you should, and how you know what the norms are is that it's the norms for the goniometric measurement for that joint that you measured. So normal for elbow extension is 0. So the norm for the biceps test, if you're measuring the elbow, should be 0. What do we know the norm to be for the shoulder? For extension, sorry, I wasn't very clear. 60.
Yeah.
60. So if she has more than 60, then that would not be a limitation because of her biceps. Okay, so the norms for the length tests are going to be the same as the range of motion for goniometry for these 2 joint muscles. Okay, so I would not do both of these biceps tests in the same person.
Okay.
So you would choose which one you wanted to do based on the person's symptoms. Okay, so if I was already measuring shoulder and then having it on the elbow, if I was already measuring elbow stuff for other reasons, I would probably do the length test at the elbow as well because I've already had those other measurements to compare it to. Likewise, if I had measured shoulder extension before, I would probably do shoulder extension here because I'd be able to interpret those data a little bit better. Okay? Now, for triceps, the same thing is true. Sorry,
You're
Kevin.
good.
So what does the triceps do at the shoulder? Extends. And what does it do at the elbow? Extends. So we're going to be flexing at both of those joints. Now, we again have a choice. We can maximally flex her at the shoulder and then flex her elbow and take that measurement, or we can maximally flex her at the elbow and then measure shoulder flexion. Okay? But remember, for a two-joint muscle, the trick to think about is we're going to maximally lengthen it at one joint. So we're going to go the opposite the direction of the action of the muscle. And then we're going to measure the length going the direction, the opposite of the action of the muscle at the second joint. So if we maximally flex here, so we're lengthening the triceps around the elbow, and then I pull her into shoulder flexion. Now we're running into a problem with her hand. So can we have you go angled at the table a little bit more? Can you scoot your, there you go. Yeah, let's keep your head a little bit closer in. So I bring her back. Now I can measure her shoulder flexion. Okay. Oops, I moved my goatee, sorry. Okay. And so for flexion, she had 134 degrees. Okay. Now my guess is that she has more than 130, I'm going to talk about you in the third person, that she has more than 134 degrees of shoulder flexion. So my guess is she does have some tightness in her triceps. Okay. Now the other way is a little bit harder to measure for triceps. So now I've maximally flexed her, and now I'm going to measure flexion of her elbow, and that gets tricky because we all have these big noggins on our head, right? So for this one, that gets harder to measure, and so it's easier if you measure shoulder flexion by doing it here, but you can do it both ways. Okay? So let's have you go ahead and do those two tests.